All right, welcome back. We are back with a debate. We want to talk about the idea of how dominant Red Bull has been for the last few seasons and whether it's really ruining the sport or not. And we haven't talked a whole lot about this, but my suspicion is that you and I don't agree on this. So I'm looking forward to learning what you have to say. But in the end, I think you'll agree with what I have to say, which is that I believe that Red Bull being this dominant is not good for the sport. I have spoken about this in the past and said, for the sport to grow in popularity and for the benchmarks that Liberty Media has set for itself in gaining new viewers and sustaining them, that Red Bull being this dominant in this part of the sort of the Formula One ecosystem that's existed for years and years now is not a healthy thing. And I personally would like to blame them for it. What about you?
Uh, I was right there with you up until I would like to blame them for it. Um, I do think that Red Bull being as dominant as they are is is a problem. It's a massive problem. Um, the quarterly viewership last season had gone down um, marginally from one quarter to the next. Based in comparison to the year before. Um, and that can only be because Red Bull are just winning everything, winning 23 out of 24 races. That can't
So,
be a good thing. So I'm with you on that. But my issue with this is what's the solution, Amar? What do we do? We're going to peg
well,
Red Bull back?
I would like to have a case study in why Red Bull nailed all of this so much better than the other teams. Like the problem for me is that no one has even come close to them, right? And that is mind-boggling because if you look at the field, right? Yes, there's Adrian Newey on one side, but it's not like they're idiots sitting around anywhere else. Like these are also smart people that have unbelievable intelligence and an unbelievable capability in cracking the code. And it's not also the fact that this was happening in 2022 only, right? Well, we've had 2023, which has been way more dominant than 2022, arguably because Red Bull made a couple of mistakes along the way, right? But and then this year coming into 24, it looks like they've once again taken this massive step ahead and just listening to the other teams sort of, bemoan the fact that, oh wow, we didn't expect that this would be what they would do. It's just crazy to me. So
Don't they? They don't have one single thing. It's the fact that their architecture from from day one showed a fundamental understanding of what you needed to balance the need for a stable aero platform and gaining good downforce. They recognized that having a stable platform, having consistent downforce was more important than chasing peak downforce, which was going to give you porpoising. And the problem that we had was that all of the teams going into 2023, all of them, you can't just say it was Mercedes persisting with their zero pods because Ferrari had those Yorkshire puddings on their car at the beginning of the season as well. All of them thought, nah, this is just a problem with us not optimizing our own concept. So we'll carry on with our own concept and see if we can make it work. So we then lost another season because under a cost cap, they couldn't then bring a proper B spec car with a completely overhauled mechanical package when they finally understood that that's what they needed. So they were locked into this compromise for the whole season, and Red Bull just reaped the reward.
here's what I want to ask you. Do you think the cost cap breach had anything to do with the advantage?
Scrap the cost cap. So you could just scrap the cost cap and and say that spend what you want. Teams come along with a B spec, and you get slightly more competitive racing. But my problem with that is that you then lose the ability to keep 10 teams on the grid. Haas are not going to stick around if they're having to spend
Uh,
millions and millions and millions. If you take the cost cap out of it, the FIA have already introduced a measure to try and limit how far ahead a dominant team get. They've already got the aerodynamic testing restrictions. You've already got a wind tunnel penalty. Red Bull have 30% less
yeah.
less testing than the fifth team in the constructors last year.
But do they though? Now this brings up another sort of can of worms, right? They do have a second team running, right? So it
Okay.
is it is not proven in any way. This is highly speculative, right? But I can see the possibility that the RB Alpha Tauri team might have been used in some way to test certain concepts that would have could have gone back to Red Bull in some way. You are going to argue the fact that there is lesser wind tunnel time, and yes, you can put aerodynamic progression restrictions. I think the opposite could be argued, and we've seen Zach Brown raise this issue time and time again of the fact that there are two teams owned by the same entity, and that yes, there's no way to prove that certain things are happening. Not alleging that Red Bull have cheated in any other way. I think that there's nothing one can do except for, salute them and hats off to them for nailing it in a way that no one else has. And that should really be applauded on in and of its own without any qualifiers at all. But
Oh,
they
but there
do
will
have a
be some
second team.
crossover. But I mean, and there will definitely be some crossover because you can't tell me that when those two teams are on the same campus, that Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda aren't going to be using the Red Bull simulator. Like, I'm sorry, but there's no way that you're not going to see those two.
Exactly.
And even before Daniel Ricciardo got in the AlphaTauri seat, he was in the Red Bull sim. He
Yeah.
was doing tests with Red Bull. So, you could turn around and say, oh, well, he's not
Transfer.
an
Yeah.
engineer. But actually the insight that he brings from one team to the other is it's still useful to the team that he's going back to, right?
Right.
So I agree
And we
that is a conflict of interest. I think it probably is a bit of a stretch again to say that Red Bull can thank all of their dominance on the fact that they have a second team and they're taking things off them. But then the AlphaTauri was much better in the low speed than the Red Bull was towards the end of last season. If Red Bull have suddenly taken some of their ideas on board, um, they would have a better understanding of what AlphaTauri did last season than other teams that would try and do the same thing. So, yeah, I do take that point, and I fully back the idea that we get rid of one company owning two teams, and we've argued that on a separate video, link in the description below. Um, but but these are small fry things. Are they going to fundamentally change what the pecking order is, or bring Red Bull back in, or is that even what should be
no.
happening?
No, but it does in this we're sort of locked in, right? And we're in the middle of the of these new sets of regulations, right? And so there is there's nothing that can be done to sort of tweak this, right? And it does seem pretty ominous, right? That they will finish out at least this year and maybe even next year, at least being ahead, if not winning it all. And go ahead. You're gonna
So
say
I mean,
something?
look, yeah, my 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 friend Cameron on another channel would always argue that the how is less important than the why, right? So should you do it is more important than how you do it because none of us have that solution necessarily, right? I don't have a way of pegging Red Bull back. Even if they did have a particular trick that you could ban, banning DAS in 2021 wasn't the thing that pegged Mercedes back. It was the floor changes, which were random. It was expected that they would hurt Red Bull more than they hurt Mercedes. So that was an unintended consequence. No matter what people will argue about that. Um,
Well,
Even banning party modes didn't peg Mercedes back particularly, right? It was
what do
a
you What do you think about the in the context of porpoising, right? Where in what was it, four races into 2022 when that happened, and that really I would argue pulled Ferrari back from maybe not Mercedes,
exactly,
and in
exactly.
that
So
race. So
exactly, exactly. So you don't know that what you're going to do is actually going to
yeah,
hamper another team, which is exactly
yeah.
what TD39 did. So what can you do? I think the only way to make this work is to empower the other teams. But my problem with that at the moment is that the FIA did empower the other teams. They've already got the aerodynamic testing restrictions in place.
Yeah.
Can they help it if the other teams miss the memo for an
I
entire year?
Yeah,
I don't think you can.
I don't think you can. I think that you also have to recognize that you're in a new phase of rules that are starkly different from what's been there before. And this is where you cannot underestimate the idea of having a cap on your spending. Most other sports around the world have that, and then they have a salary cap, right? It's not the same thing, but it's kind of sort of similar in that regard, right?
Mm.
And I do think that, we're only what, year three into this, right? So you do have to kind of give it some time to wait and see. I would definitely not be in favor of making any knee-jerk reactions right now because you do get to the unintended consequences that you're talking about.
Yeah, but the argument to that is that we've only got one more season of this left anyway, and
Yeah.
then we're going to have a
So
rules reset anyway. And is Adrian Newey going to have picked up something that everybody else has missed? Most likely.
yeah.
Um,
Well, but
and
but
then
but
and then
teams
what do you do?
will I mean, I think and this is not so much the technicalities of it, right? This is all about operating in a cost cap and being efficient. And teams like Ferrari and Mercedes and even Red Bull, if they were behind right now, they would have been stuck too, right? And these teams have been used to having a surplus of resources to be able to catch up. Sometimes in a span of a couple of races, sometimes within parts of a season. So I think that's where I think that teams can sort of push themselves to be more precise, be more strategic. And I'm not suggesting that they have not been. Clearly they've taken calculated gambles that didn't work out, and so be it, and they'll learn from it and they'll be better for it, and they'll also get people from Red Bull, which a lot of teams have, to make
Yeah,
that
yeah,
better
yeah.
too. So there's that.
But it's just taken them a long time to get it. And look, I am a big fan of the cost cap, right? I think it secures the grid, it makes teams more financially secure, it allows everyone to, in theory, be on a level playing field. But you cannot deny the fact that if there hadn't been a cost cap, Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes would have just brought a B spec car, and Red Bull, and they would have done all their learning about their brand new concepts that they're doing right now. They
Right.
would have done it. They would have done it
what
9 months ago.
what's taken 2 years would have taken 2 months, maybe, right?
Yeah.
If
So
that,
so
right?
so I do recognize that as a again an unintended consequence. It's an unintended consequence of the cost cap. But but does
So
that outweigh the 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 benefit you get from having 10 healthy teams that could all potentially compete for the top spot on the grid?
So I'm glad you're bringing this up, right? Because you alluded to the fact that there is a timing element of this, right? And this is not an issue so much for the competitors within, but if you take a step back and look at the Formula One ecosystem as a whole, right? What has F1 tried to do, at least in the last 5 years? Gain new fans, set up a
Mm.
stronghold in America, do all of the things that they're competing for. So now you have to sort of look at it from the lens of how do we grab more fans? In a hyper competitive, just I'm just going to talk about the American environment, but this might be true elsewhere too, right? The American sports environment is hyper competitive, where Formula One doesn't even make it in the top 10 of popular sports at this moment in time. And that's what they're trying to do, is to get up there. I mean, even Major League Soccer has taken such a while to get there, and it's still arguably not there, and it's not even considered in the top five of sports. So that's what F1 is competing with. And this is where I think the name of the game, so to speak, changes, right? In that we've seen some of this happen in the past, right? There have been dominant seasons in the past. Mercedes just came off of one, right? Up until 21. Ferrari have had their run. Red Bull had their own run of 4 seasons back with Seb. That it hasn't been an issue in the past because Formula One has not had overarching goals to sort of reach beyond what they're doing. And we always hear about
Thank
the
you.
fact that there's this tension between sport and entertainment, sport and entertainment. Frankly, that's true in every sport that's now trying to grab more eyeballs. And in the day and age of YouTube videos, aka us, and everywhere their content is streamed, it's the audience, especially the new audience, that is growing impatient, right? It's the new fans that are complaining. It's not you and I, right? Because we can find
I
interest
I
in. Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I
We
totally enjoyed 2023. I had no problem with it.
we have seen, and shout out to the folks that have been dropping in comments, but I have seen a steady stream of folks saying, well, the season's over. I'll probably catch a race or two here and there. That's the stuff that Formula One doesn't want. I don't know how you fix it. Like to your point, there is danger in making changes because there is always unintended consequences, and you might be doing one thing here, and then it might end up being the sort of the other way around. But this is a problem for the sport. It's also only because they have set themselves up for this too.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah, I agree. You mean in terms of the cost cap?
The cost cap and just the sport in general, right? And again, if you
Oh,
have
okay.
fans,
Yeah,
if you're,
expectations
and
are
this
different. Yeah.
this is a critical year,
Yeah.
right? We've talked about this before. This is let's just hope for whatever reason 2024 is not a repeat of 2023. Maybe the gamble that Red Bull has taken does keep them competitive, but maybe not as much as they were last year. Or maybe the other teams have caught up. But if it does end up looking even 75% like last year, this is a terrible season from a racing standpoint. And while Lewis Hamilton has given us something to look forward to this year, ultimately, folks are going to be looking at what happens off track. And what Formula One wants is to have people on track. They want to be
Yeah.
able to sell tickets at sky high prices. They want to have that. Like that is still a big part of the game, even as digital content, digital media keeps growing. Ultimately, your sport has to be the thing. It's not the transaction that'll sustain the sport, it's the action that'll sustain the sport.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think that that's probably where we're gonna where I draw my summary, which is that yes, I agree that having one team dominance, winning t all but one race in a season is going to put people off. If there's no tension in the championship battle, why would you watch if it's already a foregone conclusion? I get that. But how you change that, how you bring about the change you want, it's very easy here to define the problem, as we've said before. I don't think it's quite as simple to come up with a solution for it. And that I think is what's
No.
going to vex everybody. Because I have to say, from a empirical point of view, the FIA and Formula One have done all of the right things. They've given you a
No.
cost cap to balance the financial platform, and they've given you aerodynamic testing regulations that penalize the more successful teams.
So
Beyond
I
that,
think you're
what
right.
else can you do?
You're right. And in some ways, if you think back to how these regulations were introduced, right, and the way it was planned, think about it. We have a fantastic 2021 season, one that probably ranks in the top of the top seasons in Formula One history, right? And in theory, these regulations would have introduced a form of racing that would have more or less mimicked what 2021 was, not with two competitors, but hopefully with five, six, seven, eight competitors. I mean, that might have been the goal, right? The problem is Red Bull nailed it, and everyone else didn't even come close to nailing it. That's
This
just
is
it.
yeah, this is because physics ultimately rules Formula One, right? There
Exactly.
is there's an unknown that there is an uncontrollable quality to your competitors. You can regulate whatever the hell you want, but you cannot stop one competitor coming up with one little thing that's going to suddenly make them much quicker than everybody else and make it much harder for everybody else to catch up. Because that's just what physics is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
The Red Bull have read those rules,
so,
created the fastest car they possibly can. And if that goes against the spirit of your regulations, well, then
yeah.
again,
Yeah.
perhaps
So,
the aim of
so
your rules is wrong.
no, I agree with you. And I think this is also this is something that does not happen instantly, right? This takes time and effort, and it takes phases. So we have to go through this phase of this iteration of rules and regulations, the cost cap being one of the biggest changes. It's a major change. And that the impact of that, the outcomes of that regulation cannot be judged within a season or two or three. This has to be a 5, 10 year project where you come out and sort of take a look back and say, okay, this is what our intention was. This was the outcome, and maybe we tweak this or we tweak that. Knee-jerk reactions and too much tweaking creates more confusion, more sort of side drama that really probably isn't needed. So while I hate the fact that Max would run away with everything, you'd rather have that play out versus then start to look like you're just tinkering around with the sport to manufacture a result or manufacture sort of artificial competition in some ways. And I'm not suggesting that that would happen, but that would be the perception for a lot of people. So oh, go ahead. You're going to say something?
Yeah, it was very quickly just to say that the point about unintended consequences is can be compounded by the fact that actually what you'd expect is that over time the teams, as you say, should start to converge anyway. Now, even if Red Bull are miles ahead at the beginning of the season this year, the other teams, they have got their mechanical packages sorted, are not as much of a disadvantage as they were last year, where they couldn't change the mechanical package and they were hamstrung by it.
Yeah.
Changing the aerodynamic devices is, you don't have to homologate the bodywork on top of your car. You don't have to homologate all of the aerodynamic devices. You do have to homologate the position of your cockpit and the fundamental architecture of your car. And you can't change that mid-season without completely crash testing it again and doing all of that stuff again. But you can change all the aerodynamic addenda. And if that is the case, and the mechanical package on all of the cars chasing Red Bull work, then they can start bringing all of the aerodynamic stuff, and that will come quickly. They can bring that stuff
Yeah.
quickly, not
Yeah.
in the same way that they would in a non-cost cap era, but quicker than they could a fundamental change in their mechanical package. So just as a very cautious word of optimism, I think that there's more of a chance of the following teams catching Red Bull over
Yeah.
24 and 25 than there was in 22 and 23 when they didn't understand why they were so slow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And so with that, I will give this one to you because I do agree with you. I don't think you can ultimately blame Red Bull, which is what we kind of started this debate with, right? It's not their fault that they nailed it. It does really speak to what a lot of other teams got wrong, and maybe a back marker could have. I would have loved to see a scenario in which Haas somehow magically found what Red Bull did, and imagine what that would look like. That would have been a crazy outcome. And I hope that at some point in the future we do get one of those odd seasons where someone randomly comes out of the blue and just sort of dominates in a way that
Does a
isn't the
does a
big teams, right? That makes a great story too. So, but
Yeah, well, does a Brawn 2009? Nobody was
yeah,
particularly complaining about Brawn being dominant for the first half of '09
no one
because they
was.
were a brand spanking new team.
They
It's
were
just because
brand.
it's Red Bull and it's more of the same.
Yeah,
I
I
totally
think.
get that.
Totally get that. All right. So with that, there you have it. I don't think we can blame Red Bull for it, but this is really on the other teams and not even on the regulators, I would add, to make it happen. Like make it work, make the best with what you have and go out and beat them.
That's it. Don't let the other teams gaslight you.
There you go. There you go.